Today, we're going to be speaking with the president and CEO of Media Matters, Angelo Carusone. We're going to talk about, many different things. Angelo, it's great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you.
So, to start with, there is a feeling that Fox News in particular, and maybe some other right-wing media, are starting to set up a little bit of like an eject button or an escape hatch were Donald Trump not to be the Republican nominee in 2024. Fox News ran like a man on the street segment where they had a bunch of people saying, oh, no, if it was up to me, it would be DeSantis who's the nominee. They're not really against Trump, but it feels as though they're setting up an escape hatch. Is that your sense of what's going on?
Yeah, I think that's I like the way that you put it, because a lot of people oftentimes put it like they've turned on Trump. It's
Right.
like, oh, that's a little extreme. But the escape hatch is the right way to think about it, which is that, one of the things that has happened and is that, in the past, Trump sort of captured Fox News's audience and was able to really leapfrog Fox News and speak directly to them. And then the audience, kind of forced Fox to align. That's how he captured them. He seized it.
Yep.
He doesn't have the same tools available to him. There's opposing candidates like DeSantis that help create some of that friction. So what they're basically doing is hedging. And I would just remind everyone that this is a very similar posture that Fox News was in or place in 2015. In 2015, they had the Fox News primary where you would have candidates that would get a ton of attention. That would be the flavor of the 2 weeks, and they would shoot to the top. And there was people criticizing Trump on air, on network. There was factions within Fox that had different people that they supported. And I think that's starting to emerge right now. I also think, they're hedging because it's not clear that Trump is going to be able to replicate what he did in 2016. And they kind of know it. So escape hatch is exactly the right way to put it.
To go back to 2015, 2016, there was that early period where Fox was very much not on the Trump train. And as you say, ultimately, they did acquiesce. Is there anything about the backstory of the relationship between Trump and the Murdochs that is relevant to how that went, or was that not a factor in your mind?
It was not so much of a factor. It was really about Roger Ailes. The only thing that was relevant at the time about the Murdochs is that Rupert Murdoch has always wanted Fox to really have a president, like not to just have an alliance with the president. They were obviously aligned with the Bush administration, but they were two different entities that sort of had some synergy and alignment. What Murdoch has always fantasized about has been to really create a president. Or a world leader, but really a president. And so when Ailes started to put more of the Fox News juice behind Trump as things started to seem to break in his favor, Murdoch really saw that as an opportunity to create something. And that's where he sort of said, okay, I'm all in now. And then he cashed in on those favors as soon as Trump got into office, right? By doing some pretty outrageous things, trying to get him to slow down the deals so that he could muck with and maybe even buy CNN. And, that was the determining factor. But it wasn't until after it was pretty clear that Trump could capture the nomination that Murdoch said, okay, we can go all in now.
Before the FBI search at Mar-a-Lago, there was this stretch of time where Trump was just gone from Fox News. He was doing and still is doing interviews where oftentimes he's just literally phoning it in, channels that nobody's heard of. And, it seemed as though maybe this was a sign that his star is fading. After the search, there was the Sean Hannity interview, which, by the way, was a total disaster. Didn't really do anything good for him. But put that aside for a second. Was there something to that absence from Fox News in your mind?
There was. Now, they still talked about him 9 to 10, 15 times more than anybody else.
Yeah.
But there was something to it. Two things, actually. One was that was the beginning of the January 6th hearings. And there was all of this information coming out, testimony, where, there was actually, Fox News hosts were part of it, where they were actually texting and talking. So it complicated things a little bit. And then the second thing, and this is really important, is that the defamation lawsuit that from Dominion, which is that voting machine company that's suing Fox News for $1 billion, they had been arguing for almost 7-8 months that the Murdochs would not be part of it. And just at the beginning of the summer, it was the courts ruled that actually the Murdochs will be a part of this litigation. And what that meant is that Fox executives and the Murdochs were trying to demonstrate that, oh, there's some distance between us and Trump. And there was a little bit of back and forth over that summer as they started to calibrate their legal strategy. So I think it was really those two things coming together, which is let's keep him at arm's length, because every time he appears on our network, it's either going to create a new round of stories about our host for January 6th, or it's going to complicate the back end stuff that we're dealing with this massive billion-dollar lawsuit.
So I want to get off Fox after one more question and get onto some other right-wing media outlets. But at this point, do you have a sense of who's more powerful within the Republican base in terms of Trump or Fox News, in the sense of if Trump says I'm running and Fox did decide we actually want to prevent Trump from being the nominee, who is the power right now?
Tucker.
Tucker. Okay. Specifically Tucker.
Yeah, it's just Tucker. And so the rest of Fox would break for Trump at this point. Fox would be able to capture, Trump would be able to hijack the Fox audience. And we're seeing that play out a little bit right now with the attacks on Pelosi's husband. You know, Fox initially treated it like a traditional crime story. And then after sort of the Trump part of the ecosystem was weaving conspiracies, all of a sudden Fox News sort of broke and went with the conspiracy direction. So there's lots of indicators like that. So if Fox was against Trump, Trump would win that fight. But if Tucker is, then Trump is in trouble, because Tucker really has replaced Limbaugh as sort of like what he used to describe as the titular head of the Republican Party. Tucker has really filled that space. So Trump v. Fox, Trump. Trump v. Tucker, Tucker.
What do you make of recently even Newsmax? So the way I put some of these on a spectrum is you've got Fox, which is on the right, and then you've got Newsmax, which is crazier than Fox, and then you've got OAN, which is crazier than Newsmax. That I sort of have them like that, and you can tell me whether you agree or disagree. Newsmax recently is not even taking all of Donald Trump's rallies. They still take most of them, but not all of them. Does that mean that even within the even crazier wing, maybe Trump's star is fading?
A little bit, and it's also, it's a little complicated too, because some other entities went out there and really cornered that market of the rallies live. So, Trump's own lawyer hosts on Right Side Broadcasting.
Right.
When they're they have an inside track. Fox News actually has an entire channel on their Fox Nation app that they will give away free trials for. So they use the Trump rallies to get more people to sign up. The entire section is devoted to just Trump's rallies. So the others got into the space to try to commercialize it. So I think there's a financial cornering the market factor, but I look at the metrics. They see that the rallies don't have the same juice and star power that they did in the past. And for Newsmax, which has slightly thinner margins, it doesn't get them the same bang for the buck. And also, every time he says something about the election, they have to worry about their channels and getting zapped. And so for them, it's just not worth it.
So you talked a little bit about the Trump versus someone else primary in terms of Tucker and the power dynamics there. But if we zoom out a little and even separate it maybe from Fox News, how do you believe right-wing media more generally will handle if it's Trump DeSantis? Because I don't think DeSantis can be written off as a rhino in the same way that they do with Mitt Romney, for example. So what do you think they're going to come up with for covering such a primary?
It's going to be really hard. There's two complicating factors. There's two big considerations. One is that DeSantis has a pretty potent piece of kryptonite that he started to deploy, which is vaccines. And it started over the summer. And he started to basically, he's been apologizing for saying that he was misled. He should have never promoted the vaccines. It's probably the only wedge where he can really successfully outflank Trump to the right and have credibility with the right-wing media. And that's what it's about. It's about sort of hijacking the right or outflanking Trump when it comes to some of these right-wing personalities to say, look at DeSantis. He's willing to accept the fact that he should have never, and he's been anti-vax and he's anti-state control and we're free, liberty. And, he did it a little bit over the summer and it worked. It changed the way right-wing media talked about them. That's when Alex Jones started to really hit Donald Trump, was on the vaccine stuff. And then you could look at a bunch of these right-wing media hosts that were saying, ooh, Trump's going to have to grapple with this at some point. Why won't he just say he was lied to? Why won't he apologize about this? He's so stubborn. And DeSantis started to, basically deployed it as a trial balloon, did it for about 6 weeks, and he walked it back. So I think one is how heavily he leans into that and how Trump navigates that is a weakness, because Trump's base is not with Trump on this. And that is this weird tension where he's out of step with them. And so that's one. And I think that will affect the way the right-wing media lines up, because it will give them cover to then criticize Trump in a way that doesn't get them blowback from their own audiences, is to get him on that terrain. So that's one part. And then the other part is actually a knock against DeSantis, is that DeSantis is no fun. So the truth is, nobody really likes him.
Right.
That's what everyone's hedging on. And I'm not trying to be mean or glib about it. It's the truth. He really is no fun. Even his closest allies acknowledge that he's genuinely no fun. He's aloof. He's not charismatic. And if you're in the media, you need to think about the product. And what's the sustaining and staying power? And that's the challenge with DeSantis, is that I think from the media perspective, they're all aware of the fact that DeSantis doesn't have the same sort of like regenerative power in terms of media consumption in the way that Trump does. So it's this weird thing. But I do think the vaccine piece is going to really be challenging, and Trump is going to take a lot of flack for that from the right-wing media. And if they want to jump, that's going to be their launch pad.
Last thing I want to ask you about, what is the timing of the 2024 primary getting going? Because some part of me thinks it gets going on November 9th, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have always been pointing to the fact that there's no way that Trump would announce a candidacy until his airplane was ready. And it was supposed to be ready back in July. But of course, because of all the supply chain issues, pieces of it weren't complete and the timeline got radically disrupted. It is now officially finished. There's no way that he would run for president without his plane. It's too much of an important part of the staging.
Right.
And so it was an obvious, to me, it just felt very obvious that he couldn't be a candidate without his plane. It doesn't work. And so that's, to me, if this plane wasn't ready, I would say we have to wait. But because his plane is now ready, I agree with you. I think it's going to start almost immediately after November 9th. And that ties into what's happening now, because a lot of what's happening on the ground, the infrastructure at the state level, a lot of the organizations, the cluster of groups that are going to get power or potentially get power if the election goes in their favor, this is all part of the Trump ecosystem that has been building this groundwork. So it's going to almost be at the apex and a lot of momentum for him to make a quick jump. And he's also seen, to the extent that they're going to challenge any elections, he's really the face of that strategy and approach. So I think you're right. It's going to start very, very, very early.
And it sounds like from the language you're using, you have no doubt whatsoever that Trump is running.
Yeah, I think he's going to run for sure. I do. I don't think there's any reason to stop him from running. And he is fueled in large part by spite and revenge. And every measurable indicator still shows that he could succeed in the primary. His assessment of DeSantis is that he is too miserable of a person to successfully to replace him as the head of the party. And DeSantis, I think, I think he's a little hesitant to get too bloodied up by Trump because it can be a messy battle. So there is a little bit of a delicate balancing act there. But yeah, I do. I think for a lot of reasons, there's no doubt that he will, in my mind, that he will run unless there's some major intervening circumstance.
This is really the last thing, and then I'll let you go. It seems very clear that there's a lot of people in right-wing media right now, and even some of the candidates, starting to prepare for, if we lose, it was rigged. But we also know that caused significant legal problems for a lot of media when they did it with 2020. What do you expect on November 9th, 10th, 11th, as far as that story goes?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would just point out, I'm glad you asked this, is that because it demonstrated to be a challenge, they've adapted. And the way that they adapted was by building an infrastructure of these groups and entities that they'll be able to cite and reference, and they're disposable. So you could cite
so they can say this group makes this claim and they filed this lawsuit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so they really, there's a lot of synergy. There are about 14 of them in operation right now. They're promoting all these apps that help collect this information. Most of them are disposable. They're not infrastructure. They're not designed to have staying power. They're shells. And that was a way and they've done little ones at the major states. There's one in Pennsylvania. There's one in Arizona. They're all tied into right-wing media. They get a lot of attention, a lot of press, a lot of engagement, a lot of audience traction. They've been pumping them up now for about 10 months. And so That's the workaround, is that they found a way to essentially create a shield so that the media operations can engage in the same kinds of attacks, but now they have this layer of cover. They'll never get sued for citing a third-party organization. The third-party organization can get sued, but they won't. That was Fox's problem, in 2020, is that they were just saying these things that they were getting texted. They were the source, and now they've really found a way to create that. And I think that is the one thing that I don't think people broadly have a full handle on, is that they've built the infrastructure to actually do what they did in 2020, but at scale, in a much more professional way, and in a much more scale and much more volume.
Yeah. Slick and scary at the same time, I guess I would say. We've been speaking with the president and CEO of Media Matters, Angelo Carusone. Always great to talk to you, and appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.